Swinburne University of Technology.
Very much, Michael. Michael's sort of given you the global picture. I'm going to sort of look at Australia, but from the outside in. And hopefully this will come up. I'm starting where Michael left off with Brad Smith. And the reason I believe in transparency has less to do with all the legal stuff. It's really about a recognition of where we are today. And that is that as philanthropy, as Brad Smith says, as philanthropy strives to become more strategic and effective, because they really want to make a difference, its impact and influence will grow. But the corollary of that is more scrutiny, more praise, more curiosity, more criticism. And it's that, I think, from a reality check of where we are today that I think is one of the major drivers. But personally for me there are others. The use of data for predictive purposes. This is really important for me and around evaluation, measurement and a greater understanding of social impact. The reason this is important is that whenever I talk to a philanthropist, they all want to make a difference. And the only way we're going to know if you're making a difference is to start thinking about measurement and evaluation, and that requires data. We need it to facilitate the sector and academic research, to identify underserved communities, geographic regions that are hard to reach. Hopefully facilitate some and promote the collaboration among funders, avoid duplication, another real key for a lot of people, and in many cases inform public policy making. So where are we? Well, as an industry we have very little data, and one of the biggest challenges is that it's really hard to work out where you're going if you don't know where you've come from. And so that's really where I'm coming from. To talk about Lucy Bernholtz's position here, when you start thinking about this and the lack of industry data, I mean, for most people who join the philanthropic sector, they can't believe you can't even tell the size. I mean, if you think about something like Telstra, for example, there's a whole lot of information on the telco industry in Australia, who the players are, why, how big they are, how small they are, what their services are. That's virtually absent in the public arena in Australia. The question is, why is that? Well, actually, most of the information that people deal with, they don't actually share it. Not because it's scandalous, not because it's really important to keep to themselves, it's just because it was never done that way in the past. And indeed, many people haven't even thought about it. And I'll talk about my report in a moment, but one of the questions, when I went to some of the foundations about using their data that was publicly available, they said, well, I didn't know anyone would even be interested in it. So there's a real misunderstanding around and lack of understanding of actually about the usage of data, how it could be used. But I think I'm very persuaded by Lucy's comment at the bottom there. If we're going to scale any of our efforts to solve social problems, we've got to make much better use of the fastest scaling tool humans have ever built, open data. So, I looked at this and thought, right, how do we go about this? Let's develop a baseline for data. So I started with the idea of looking at where the money goes. I am not particularly interested in who's got the biggest foundation, who gives the most money away. I don't particularly care who the trustees are. None of that for me makes a big difference to scaling, to making social impact. For me, what's really interesting is how we're actually making impact. Are we making it at all? Are we improving the situation? And the only way that we can do that is take data, and the first starting place for me is where the money goes. So I was supported by Telstra and the Myer Foundation, and I thank them very much, because with no data, you need a few brave souls who are going to back you in this sort of thing. So I thank them for supporting this. The second thing is that I looked at the foundation data for 12 foundations. And the reason I chose those 12 Foundation is that they were the 12 foundations who have reported publicly over some years a great deal of detail about their grant making. They all agreed, I asked them all, and they all agreed that they were happy for me to use their information. It is in the public arena. I didn't have to ask them. They didn't have to give their permission, but they did, which was terrific. I collected 3 years of data, publicly available, on basic information on grants. There were some 4,000 grants totaling $207 million. Key observations. With the exception of the Colonial Foundation, most of the organisations gave a few large, strategic, multi-year philanthropic grants, supported by when I say extensive, a really quite extensive small grants program. By the way, of the 12 foundations, 10 are based here in Victoria, and some are only able to give outside of Victoria, only able to give within Victoria, not outside of Victoria. So it's quite a skewed sample from that perspective, particularly on an Australian perspective. Having said that, the majority of the grants are small and fragmented. 80% are for less than $50,000, and indeed 36% are for less than $10,000. So these are large foundations giving away on average around $5 million a year, $6 million in 2010, where there was, we still had a lot of money from dividends, but it dropped down after the global financial crisis. But still, $5 million, $6 million a year, a third of your grants for less than $10,000. So that's quite a spread. Indeed, it goes to the breadth and the number of the organisations. I was a little bit nervous that one of the findings I might discover is that, you know, in some sectors, one or two not-for-profits or recipient organisations would be receiving a whole lot of grants from all the foundations. But in actual fact, that wasn't the case. It was very widely spread. Indeed, a number of the organisations give to the smaller grants to schools all over Australia, and that's really quite pronounced for all sorts of different reasons. Many of the organisations receive multiple grants from different foundations. Little evidence of co-funding or collaboration. I found this one of the most interesting things, and in talking to a lot of the foundations, I talked to them about the fact that this is how they are reporting it out. There's little evidence of of collaboration. Indeed, what it seemed to me when I was looking at their reports was that they had deliberately chosen a quite independent strategic funding program, and that their real partnerships were very strong with the recipient organisations, but they really didn't have any partnerships with other foundations. So that was quite a striking finding, and one that's much deliberated in the sector. 24 organisations received more than 11 grants each over 3 years, totalling $48 million. That's a lot of grants from those 12 foundations in that short period of time. And the big one, anecdotal evidence suggests a lack of informed use of data. Indeed, I held a number of stakeholder workshops with the philanthropic foundations and others interested in this. And when we began the discussion, a lot of people were a bit ho-hum, couldn't really see the point, wondered why I was doing this, where it was going. But as the discussion progressed, what became obvious in the discussions, people started to think about it. And it was that they hadn't really actually thought about using their data before. Once they started to think about it, the possibilities became much greater. So, I want to know when I can count my chickens. This is the big opportunity. New technology allows us to make much more creative use of comparative data. And I've listed here things like geographic mapping, data visualisation tools, heat maps, etc. So to give you a bit of an idea, once you start looking at things like this. And I've had some feedback already on my report. One foundation came back to me and said, Gina, I'm really interested, now you've got this there, I've gone through the report. Are you able to show us metro versus rural, regional, what the regions are getting, what they aren't, for what purpose? So all of a sudden that mapping becomes interesting. Another foundation said to me, we've got this program, can you map it for us? When I started to look at it, the grants under that particular program all of a sudden seemed to be predominantly going to the leafy green suburbs of eastern Melbourne, rather than perhaps some of the more disadvantaged areas. That then allows them to balance that program with something else. But and although you might intuitively know that or guess that, when you see it mapped, it really becomes quite obvious. The second opportunity is that funders collect an enormous amount of information on the projects they fund from the organisations that make a grant. I mean, if you are a not-for-profit and you apply to a philanthropic funder of any sort, whether it be an individual or a foundation, or even to government for that matter, you know, you're required to provide, even for those that have a very small and brief grant application, a lot of information about the organisation, about the project, about what you hope to do. I wonder what foundations are doing and funders are doing with all that information they collect. And I guess that leads to, you know, could we somehow make use of the online grant applications that are increasingly a part of funders' way of accepting grants, because that information is there as a data source. As a not-for-profit, I put the information in, so it's already collected. It's got a double use. So yes, it's going there to a foundation or a funder of some sort, but to be able to use that information would be really very valuable and a cost-effective way of data collection. Thank you very much.
This has been a Swinburne production.